So normally, if I had discovered that, now we're in like 10, 15 minutes into the podcast, right? If I had discovered that at this point in the past, I would have said, I can't believe I forgot to turn the video on, right? And this time I said to myself, you know what? So we missed the first 10, 15 minutes. So it's going to be a
Yeah,
45-minute instead of an hour
yeah,
video.
yeah,
Big
yeah,
deal, you know?
yeah.
I changed the way that I decided to react to it because I was reminded through our conversation just here today that when I'm not feeling good about something, it's a signal that I'm pointing in the wrong direction. So, okay, well, instead of getting all upset about pointing in the wrong direction, how about just pointing in the right direction and it'll feel better? And so,
Hmm.
well, how do you do that with the law of attraction perspective? Well, law of attraction teaching, deliberate creation teaching tells us we have to assume the feeling first. We have to get into the thought and feeling process first, and then it will come to us.
Hmm.
So, all right, then I will get into the feeling first. I'll say, you know what? I'm not going to worry about the fact that I forgot to turn the recording on. Big deal.
Hmm. Hmm.
Life continues. The
Yeah.
life has not come to a stop because I forgot to turn the recording on.
Hmm. Hmm. So you think it's possible to get into that place no matter what's happening?
I think so. It's not
Hmm.
always easy. I mean, it's
Hmm.
simple but not easy. We use that phrase a lot, right? It's simple. It's the simplest thing in the world, but it's not easy because we have all of these habitual negative patterns playing in our head and stuff that we've been doing over and over the years. So, it takes some
Yeah.
doing to turn it around, and sometimes it takes a lot of doing. Sometimes we aren't even in a place where we feel like we can do it at all. Doesn't mean that
Yeah.
we couldn't. It just means it feels like we can. It feels
That's
so
right.
overwhelming, and oh
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
that's like so far away. I can't even begin to even think about getting there. That's the way
Yeah.
it feels
Right.
sometimes.
Right.
And it
Right.
depends what you're dealing with. If you're dealing with something really traumatic, God, I mean, all you can think about is how traumatic it is.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
even in that case, is it possible? Yeah, it's possible still in that case.
Right.
It's a
Right. Right.
question of how mindful we are, when we're in the middle of it. And that's probably the hardest part, remembering to be mindful in the middle of whatever that horrible trauma is.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. And that's something we can develop. It's a practice that we can develop to not, I guess what I call it is, I've been saying this lately a bunch, is add insult to injury. I think that's how that saying
Yeah,
goes. Like,
right.
did somebody gets injured and then you insult them on top of the fact that they're injured, or they hurt themselves again, after they totally wrecked their finger, and then they hit their finger really hard on the edge of the counter. It's like, oh man, that just added insult to my injury, made it even worse. And so I think if we begin to notice how we are our own worst enemies, and our own best friends, then when these things start to seem like they're escalating or spiraling down, we have an option to develop a new habits of how we look at that time. It doesn't mean we necessarily have integrated why we go to a bad feeling place, because
Right.
sometimes I think we're gonna do that based on those old habitual habits from childhood, that we learned a certain way of reacting in a certain situation, and we keep on playing that out. But if we make peace with that feeling when it's happening, instead of just adding to the downward spiral, then I think we can be with that feeling without adding a bunch of story to it. We don't
Hmm.
add the drama to it with our own automatic thinking that normally would have added a couple more heavy 5, 10 pound weights to our pack. It's
Right.
like, oh, I just added, but we don't realize we're doing it. It's such a habit. And so I'm seeing that, like in this emotional processing work I'm doing, you take an emotion that might not feel good, like let's say it's a real sadness or something, but then you hold it in such a way that you make peace with it. You
Mm.
accept the fact that you have it. Okay, it's here right now. It doesn't mean it'll be here next week, or that the same event's going to trigger me in that way next time. It's every moment's brand new. And so
Mm.
then you take the feeling and you feel it and you make peace with it. And that's why I
Hmm.
like that thing of making peace, because you say, well, okay, I feel really, really, really shitty. I mean, I feel really bad. And you can't say that word shitty on the air. But
So you
and
did it
and you
twice.
oh yeah, I'm sorry. And so I'm a troublemaker. So you learn how to turn it into energy. Like maybe you feel really a desperation, and you sit with it and you make peace with it. And maybe if you really learn to work with these these bad feelings, you can make peace with them in such a way that they will they will begin to integrate and no longer be a big deal when
Hmm.
they will start to be less impactful in one's life.
Mm.
And that's what I like, is that idea that things that seem like they're just parts of my personality, and so when I'm in a troubled place, I tend to get that way. And when that stuff really starts changing, because I make peace with it, and I don't constantly trying to push it away, but I do recognize that it is just an energy in me, and I'm able to somehow process it, in a way that I just breathe into it and I accept it for what it is, and it can transform that.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, I remember
that's
what.
what has to
Okay.
happen. No,
Oh,
I'm just
absolutely.
saying it's the transformation we need, because don't want to constantly be burdened by the same places we go
Yeah.
time after time, year after year.
No, it's true. Very true. In fact, it reminded me of what Wendy Dillard, who used to do podcasts with me also. Um, she would talk about this exact concept you're talking about, and her favorite thing to do was to take that thing, that bad feeling thing, and just ask it question after question after question. You know,
Hmm.
what are you about? Where are you from?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
what's causing this? Just
uh-huh,
like question after question after question, and
hmm,
listening internally for answers to it.
uh-huh.
She even described it as poking and prodding it. It's
Yeah,
almost like
yeah,
going after a wild animal. You poke it, see if it does anything.
yeah.
But
I took a
what's that?
well, I took a form of coaching where you learn to do that. And it's called persona interviews. You
Oh,
recognize a certain persona that you have. You say, why is it that I always get so angry when such and such happens? And then
mm,
you can interview that persona, and you can give it a name if you want. Like angry Tom. And then I'll interview it and ask, why do you get so angry? What is it you're trying to tell me? And when were you first created? When did you first show up in my life? And what
mm,
what have you been trying to protect me from? What are you trying to do to benefit me? And uh, and it's very interesting sometimes when you do that, uh, and you learn a whole lot about yourself
hmm.
in that
Absolutely, you
moment.
learn a lot. And the thing that Wendy found is that if she poked and prodded and asked enough questions, I mean, you talked about how it will come back less often and so forth. She found that she could get to the point where it would go away entirely. It would just
Yeah,
disappear and never come
yeah.
back, which I imagine you've experienced too, which is pretty cool. I mean, do you do what she does? No, she makes a really big deal out of not just asking the questions and poking and prodding and all that, but listening internally for guidance, for answers about whatever the thing
Yeah,
is. Do you do the same kind of thing?
yeah, sure. I mean, you a lot of the work is person goes into an alpha state, which is like a meditative state, and
Hmm.
then when they start to feel in their body, even like where do I feel this sadness or whatever it is in my body, and then they feel into that, and that'll teach sometimes, that'll show you things. You'll start realizing, oh, it's kind of moving into my arm, and you
Mm.
said now, and they say, well, do you have an image that comes up when you rub your arm? Go ahead and rub your arm. And is there an image that comes up? And sometimes I'll say, well, yeah, I see a white car. They'll come up with something, and then you can work with that and find out a lot about what it is that's underneath this feeling. You don't have to know, when did it happen, and what particular thing caused you to get that sad, that you're still getting sad every day, and
Hmm.
um, but you can get to the place where the feeling begins to dissipate in your body, and it's never the same after that. I mean, I
Mm.
don't know about completely I think I wouldn't know what things I've completely gotten rid of, but I know that
Because
I
they're
have.
gone.
Well, yeah, because there's always some new sense of like stuff that I need to process, but some of the older stuff I've processed, I could say, well, I don't know. Probably I definitely got rid of some of that. I'm not having the same triggers anymore, so that's a good sign that it's gone. When I'm
Hmm.
not
Yeah.
triggered in the same way.
Yeah, I would
And
say as long as you're not getting triggered, as long as you're not experiencing it still, then it's gone. I mean,
it could be. Yeah, well, you
what
you,
it's
you
gone
certainly
for.
don't want to, worry about it. then
Right.
it will come back.
Yeah.
That's a
Right.
tricky little thing. It's
That's
like,
guaranteed, isn't it?
yeah, the bring the worry alive, and something will come up that'll bug you,
Right.
that'll bum you out. But
That's funny how that works, though.
it's artful to not bring the worry alive.
Oh, yeah, that's the truth. That's the truth.
Yeah.
The thing about whether the universe is benign and benevolent, though, is also the interesting part of the question that we're
Hmm.
talking about today, because that's a combination I wouldn't not necessarily put together, because benevolent doesn't isn't necessarily benign, and vice versa.
Right. Well, I say it's a double whammy if the universe is both. Then it's like, I mean, that's the way that I've always pictured it when I listen to Abraham, because they talk about how you can't get it wrong, you'll never get it done,
Hmm.
and that the whole universe is designed to be a default to joy, and
Mm.
that it's all based on. So to me, it's like the Course in Miracles. That's the whole Course in Miracles, the way I understand it. And I've studied it a couple times. I didn't never become a really dedicated student of it. But its basic message is you're either dedicating your life to fear or to love. You're either allowing your life to be run by fear or by love. And at any given moment, it's either one or the other is what's driving you. And so the Course in Miracles is trying to, I think, teach, look, you could be driven by love. You don't have to be this
Hmm.
victim of fear that things are dangerous, worrisome, or otherwise fearful for one
Right.
reason or the other. And so that was really what my bigger question is. Is it true that if a person really begins to believe in love and experience it, and they add to their reservoir of experience of love, that they will become more and more able to share that with other people, and they'll be able to be in that place themselves where less and less do they feel like they're the potential victim of some really dark forces, that could just totally devastate them, or that, nobody knows what death and life is, and so there's supposed to be fear there, what you're supposed to fear something. And I wonder, can we get to the place where we recognize fear is either self-created or it doesn't exist. It's
Mm.
like it's like we either are creating the fear or there is no such thing. And I've been reading a lot of these people who do out-of-body travel. That's used to be called astral projection, where you
Right.
you know you lay down on your bed and then you get into this state where you're able to leave your body. And this one guy who was one of the pioneers of it, Bob Monroe, um, he said it seems to be completely up to the individual whether or not the fear is going to get you, no matter what realm you go into. And he went into these realms that were very earth-like realms, but there was a lot of things that were different. And then these other realms that were completely otherworldly, where nothing made any sense in terms of what he ever knew of the world or of life. But he could travel in these realms and he could meet beings and things in these other realms. And he said, so the levels of fear can get off the charts, he said. It's just that your sense of being stuck somewhere in the astral world are are really real, but he learned they depend completely on his attitude. So, if he had a good attitude, even at times where he got incredibly stuck, and once he says he went into terror and panic a number of times, like when he couldn't get back into his body and he was up against a wall he couldn't go through, because normally you can go through any kind of a wall. And he said he came up and he didn't even know where he was. He was traveling back to his body, so he was going through this nondescript place, and he freaked out. And he said eventually when he calmed down and he realized that just because he was going in the direction he thought was to his body, he could maybe get there another way. So he turned around. Instead of trying to go through this really difficult wall, he went the opposite direction, and he ended up back in his body within seconds. And
Mm-hmm.
so he realized that the fear was probably why the wall showed up. It was for him
Sure.
to process that fear, and so he's less fearful. And
Well, yeah. I mean, fear is always going to show up as a resistance of some kind. That's what a wall is. It's like the ultimate form of resistance. So, yeah, it's got to be,
mhm,
I
mhm,
would think. I'm still interested in those two words that you chose, benevolent and
benign.
benign. Benign because I normally don't think of benign as a positive. I mean, when do we
Oh,
use the word
yeah.
benign? We use benign with tumors, right? It's either malignant or benign.
Oh,
Well, benign's
yeah.
the better one, right? So, okay, well that's the better one. But what benign really means is that it's not harmful. It's harmless.
Right. And
And
I've always associated that with a good thing, like a really good thing.
and I know what you mean, but I also look at the translation harmless, and harmless falls into the category of focusing on the wrong end of the stick. It's the
Oh.
lack end,
Hmm.
and that's what the word benign is to me. Benign is it's the lack end of the good stick. It's like, yes, okay, well, it's good, sort of, but it's not really good, good. It's just sort
Benign,
of,
yeah. Benign means, yeah, it ultimately won't hurt you. It
it won't
it
hurt
might
you, yeah.
it might
But how
appear
about something
to.
that'll help you, that'll feel good, or that'll help you, or something? That I want a word that says something like that. And then I look at benevolent, and when do we use the word benevolent? Well, it's like, benevolent dictator. Well, that's not really good feeling. It's better than a tyrannical dictator, but
Yeah.
what else do we use benevolent? Oh, well, I guess when the church hands out blankets to the poor, that's benevolent. Okay,
Yeah.
well, that's good, but I think that's why those two words were stopping me because they weren't
Huh.
bad words. It's just they weren't really good feeling words.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So when you
Well.
describe the universe as being a joyful place, I said, yeah, I think that's true. But what does benevolent and benign have to do with that?
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm definitely coming from a place of often feeling that it's a tragic there's a tragic side to the universe. There's a tragic side to this life anyway. And so I think in my work with my emotions lately, I'm trying to overcome the emotional part of me that believes that you can really get messed up in this life, and that you can end up really destitute, you can end up, really sad, lonely, all these kind of things. And so I that's part of my emotional makeup that I believe that, or that I've had that experience, and I'm trying to process that so I no longer feel that way, and in doing that, I think the words benevolent and benign seem really good from that
Hmm.
point of view. If you're feeling that you're suffering
Yeah.
and you feel that you are struggling, or you feel that you could be, you're fearful that you could be, then you need, assurance that no, you might go through some tough stuff, but you'll be okay. And because it seems to me that none of us can avoid going through some tough stuff, and maybe that's not a good perspective to have. I guess, some would say, well, no, if you only focus on good stuff, you'll only have good stuff. And I just don't believe that anymore. I think that,
Hmm.
well, I mean, I guess I do in a metaphysical sense, because this guy who does this out of body travel, he says the second you leave your body, you're so subject to thought that you have to be so careful what you think, because you think anything and you have it, and you
Hmm.
go there. You go to that place. And he said, and he started finding himself going to all these places he didn't recognize. He'd show up at somebody's house, and he wouldn't it be anybody he knew, or he'd end up in the body of somebody who was on their deathbed, and he'd realize it wasn't even him. These weren't even his relatives coming up and crying over him. So he was in somebody else's body dying. And I don't know, it's like he said, your unconscious thoughts are running you as much as your conscious ones. The ones that are happening on a level that you're not in control of. And so he said it's
But
really tricky when you get out of your body, that those things will manifest. They'll show you, stuff that you didn't even know you're thinking.
hmm yeah. Well, I think you made a good point about it depends where you're coming from. What perspective are you, and where's your emotional set point? Because
Hmm.
you described a situation where the emotional set point is not so good, and so from that perspective, benevolent and benign sound really good.
Right,
And
right.
that's a really valid position because when you're in that really dark place, getting to joy is impossible. But
Yeah.
benign or benevolent, that could be reachable. I could see that.
Yeah. It's
So
sort of
that's a
like
good line.
being hopeful
Yeah,
rather than exuberant.
yeah,
So it's on the emotional scale. It's on that emotional scale.
right, exactly. And it's a good stepping stone, so to
Yeah.
speak,
And
to getting to
sometimes
that.
I can't jump all the way to total,
Exactly.
uh, total joyfully in my joy. That's an interesting question that I've always asking myself. Like, I've named my website "You Are Joy" because I really believe my default state is joy. But what
Hmm.
stands between me and defaulting to that all the time? Sometimes I don't feel like I'm exactly defaulting to joy. I'm more like
Hmm.
defaulting to, oh, it's okay, or I'm defaulting to, I can get through this, you know.
Right.
and I want to default to joy. I want to find love and joy all the time. So go ahead. You were
Well, I think you're right,
explaining.
and I think we can. I think ultimately it comes down to this: Are we, um, where are we in our development? Are we at the point where we're still needing to take baby steps, which most of us are? And there's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with being in that place, and that's fine. And when you're in that place, there are going to be more times when we're in not the kind of joyful place we want to be in. It could be, mildly happy. It could be deeply depressed. It could be just somewhere in the middle at, boredom. It could be at frustration. It could be at hopeful. It could be at a lot of different places. But the point is, we're not living, like you say, constantly in that high state of joy. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. We came to this world as a world of contrast. So, okay, we kind of expect that. I do think what happens over time, though, and I say this from my perspective of what I've learned so far, is I do think we do learn eventually if we continue to practice, continue to get better and better at focusing on what we want, not focusing on what we don't want, doing mindful activities, meditations and affirmations and visualizations and all the Asians, doing all the
Mhm.
Asian stuff. Um, when we do those regularly and we're basically building up our ability to control our focus at all times. So that, like your guy there, Bob Monroe, talking about how um, the response to thought is instantaneous when he's doing the traveling. Well, yeah, it makes sense, and it also makes sense that the better we get at it, the more disciplined. I need a better word than disciplined. I don't like discipline. I want another one. But the more good we get at it, the better we get at it, the more we're
Practiced.
able to, yeah, the more practice, that's good. The more practiced we are, we're able to take longer steps, so to speak.
Mhm.
And if you look at it that way, I think we actually can get to the point where we can jump from depressed to joyful in one swoop. In fact, I don't think once we get to that point, I don't think we'll even end up in depressed because we just wouldn't allow ourselves to go there anymore.
Yeah.
But that's what happens, I think, over time. We just get better and better at taking big steps. Abraham and others talk about taking small steps because we haven't learned how to take big steps yet, and it takes some time. You have to kind of work at it. You have to get good at it. You have to
Mhm.
get into that place of really being very practiced and very diligent about sticking to. I only want to be in my good feeling place. I don't want to go to my other place. I don't want to go into that negative
Yeah.
spiral again. I'm sick of negative spirals.
Right.
But by the same token, because we live in a world of contrast, we go into spirals. It happens.
Yeah.
Well, those are all those spirals are good things from the perspective of we are learning how to stretch ourselves. We're learning how to push, not push, but to reach back and get back into that better feeling place easier each
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
in doing so, we become better deliberate creators. So getting back to the other question of, ultimately, are we hurt? I would say here's an example that supports Joel's thesis that we're helped, that we're actually better off. Because every time we have one of those bad feeling, traumatic kind of situations, when we springboard back up from it, we have just stretched our ability to take longer steps.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in doing so, we become stronger, we become
Mhm.
more diligent, we become more practiced.
Kind of the way that contrast works is
Yeah,
contrast sets us up for, you go for something and you finally attain it, for example, and then as soon as you attain it, you're on to the next thing and the contrast
right.
pops up again because the
Yep.
next thing also involves going through another contrast learning experience.
Hmm.
And so it seems like we're on a continual process, but are we constantly expanding? I think so. Are we constantly getting more free? I think so. Are we
Hmm.
constantly getting happier? I think so. And that's the cool thing I think about it, where I can really believe that love is sort of behind everything. You take someone like Jesus and apparently Jesus's message and maybe even Buddha. I mean, I never have studied enough to know, is that Buddha's main message is that love is behind everything. Um, and I don't know if that really is, but it certainly is a lot of mystics who seem to be able to stand behind the expression of love as the bottom line, like Rumi and Hafiz and different amazing poets who were in the
Well,
mystical tradition.
you think
Pardon?
about it. If love is source energy, if source energy is love, if they're the same
Right.
thing, then how could it be otherwise? From what,
Right.
how could it be otherwise what these various poets and teachers and so forth are saying? Because what they're basically saying is that source energy is, and
Yeah.
that is true, and it's always
Mm.
true. So yeah, of course.
Yeah. And the thing that this whole question and on a lot of podcasts lately come down to me is one thing, and that is how much how much am I a balance between my feelings that are in my body and my heart and my head, what it's telling me how
Mm,
everything works. And
yeah.
the two, it's interesting because there's brain cells in our heart, the same cells
Yeah.
that
Isn't
are
that funny?
that are creative brain cells, and they're in our gut, and
Mm,
but they're in our head. And what I'm finding is that a lot of what my life's about lately is, Tom, are you balanced in your head and your heart to where you can know what you're feeling and know what you're thinking in a way that they are really harmonizing? You know,
mm,
because sometimes I just think it's so easy with my mind to railroad through an opinion based on thought, based on, well, I'm choosing with my thinking to think this way, therefore I'll create it that way. As long
right.
as I think it that way, it'll show up that way. If I can sit here and visualize it, I can sit here and think it, and then I feel it as best I can in my body, it'll come to be. And that's kind of like the whole law of attraction right there. That's how it works. Plus a
Sure.
whole bunch of surrendering, because you have to allow stuff to come to you. You don't just create, you allow all this stuff to come to you that's in your vortex. So, and but you put it all together and you go, well, how do I be a person who's just intuitively, instinctively knows I'm on the right path, doing the right thing at the right time, in the right way, and that everything is going to be okay. Even no matter what's happening. That and I think that's my goal, sort of, as a human being, is to be somebody who can be balanced enough to know my own wisdom and to know, that I'm not kidding myself into
Hmm.
thinking a certain way that is just going to come back and bite me in the butt,
Yeah.
because I use my head to override my heart. And I
Mm,
don't think that can be done. And so I'm asking myself now, well, what is my heart really saying? What are my instincts saying? My intuition, and following that as much as I possibly can. And I'm wary of too many thoughts that always are trying to be in control.
mm,
The thoughts want to run the game. And yet, and I just said all that, and yet all kinds of things are proving that your thought is creating everything.
mm.
And so then you go, well, wait a minute. So what's this heart body thing? It has this thing called intuition, which is different than just straight up, I'm in control. Let me think a better feeling thought and I will change my life. I am in control. I'm creating my reality. And it's like, okay, and what is your intuition and your instinct and your gut level creating? And are you listening to that too? And how do they work together? I know I'm just saying the same thing over and over again, but
No,
it's a
no,
big,
it's valid stuff, and I think you made a good point, a few good points in there. One of them being you brought up the question of can the head overrule the heart? Is that a possibility? You declared that yes, it is a possibility, and when I do that, in my words, you got yourself in trouble.
well,
Um,
ultimately it can't. That's the thing.
Ultimately, it can't. Well, that's where I was going to it. It really can't, and I would suggest that perhaps what we perceive as the head trying to overrule the heart is also what we perceive as being disconnected from source. And we can't disconnect from source either. We really can't do either one of those things.
That's
But
true.
we can make it feel like we can make it seem like we're disconnected
That's
for
true. Mhm.
some space and time. And in the process of seeming like it's disconnected or seeming like the head is overruling the heart, is it really? No, not really. Is it really disconnected? No, not really. It just seems like it is.
Mhm.
So what does that say about it? Well, it says that during that period of time, we've just made ourselves miserable. That's pretty much
Yeah.
all it is. We've made
Right.
ourselves feel
Mhm.
bad, because we decided to try to do something you really can't do and got ourselves
And
all
it
miserable.
doesn't it also go vice versa in a way when you think about it? If you're so into feelings that you can't listen to changing your thoughts because you think that feeling is everything, and so you just get immersed in the feeling, but you don't even recognize that it's got all these stories attached to it.
Yeah,
It seems like you have to use your mind
with
to
the same
also
thing.
change your stories. So you got
Absolutely,
to
it's the
do
same
both.
thing. I mean, just as we can try to have our thoughts overrule our feelings, which doesn't work, so also we can try to make our feelings overrule our thoughts, which also doesn't work.
Hmm.
One can't overrule the other, but we try so hard to make it happen.
But
You know,
it's so weird that they seem to be two separate things. That there's the
I don't
head.
think they are.
I know, but they seem that way to me a lot of the time. It seems like my head is is doing something different than my body and my heart are doing. I know it can't be that way. And so I know that my work must be just to integrate them, to to end any sense of a mind body dichotomy, that oh, there's the thinking me that wants to do it this way, and there's the feeling me that says no, you can't. You've got to first feel this feeling because you repressed this feeling when you were 5 years old, and I believe that stuff happened, and I believe it still affects me, but it's like I'm trying to learn to be just expanding in a really organic way that feels good, and but let my growth be real, let it be authentic to where I really know that my direct experience is teaching me. I'm not saying words. That's what the problem with the Abraham stuff is. There's so many words, and they often stop and say, but remember, words don't teach. So it's
Mm,
easy to say all this stuff, but it's a whole other thing to live it. And I've heard them say that. I've heard Esther, say that a
sure.
number of times, and I realize that in my own coaching and my own teaching, that's what is pushing me so hard is I do not want to be someone who just spews out beliefs and words. I want to be somebody who's speaking from their own direct experience. So I
Absolutely,
want
which
to
is the
I
best way
want
to
to
grow.
know joy. I want to know what joy is. And
Sure.
speak from that place and have it be truly authentic.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, I really do think it comes down to how do we think about thoughts and feelings. Um, Probably the earliest one in America that I know of who did that was Thomas Jefferson, because he had this affair with this woman from France. Actually, it's up for dispute whether there was an actual affair, but he had a love interest with this woman in France, and when he was the French ambassador, and he sent her a letter in which he had an argument in the letter between his head and his heart, basically arguing over what should he do about her. His head
uh-huh.
was telling him one thing, his heart was telling him to do something else. So this is something that's been around for a long time, and actually you can go back to Greek mythology. You can go back to Plato and Aristotle. You can go back to very ancient times and find very similar dialogues that have gone on.
Hmm.
In our modern context, especially with what we know from what Abraham has taught us, from what we've learned from like Neville Goddard or from any of the other modern gurus of new thought and so forth, I think what it all adds up to is this. We think of thoughts and feelings as being separate. They are actually part and parcel of the same thing. They are different aspects of the same thing, so to speak, in my opinion. And I think one of the reasons we think of them as being separate is that very often when we think a thought, we can't associate a feeling with it. We can't say, you know what, I don't know what that feels like. I can't say that that feels like warm or cold or happy or sad. It's just sort of there,
Hmm.
which is how we come to the conclusion that thoughts and feelings are different. But I honestly don't think they really are. They're different, but they're part of the same thing. I don't think we ever actually have a thought that doesn't have a feeling associated with it. I think what happens is we have thoughts and we don't know what the feeling is. We can't identify it, but there's still a feeling there. We just can't say what it is. We can't say it feels happy or sad or joyful or depressed or frustrated or
Hmm.
angry or whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
We can't find a definitive feeling. And I think the reason we can't find the definitive feeling is that many thoughts, because they're thoughts we haven't been spending a lot of time on, the feeling hasn't built up yet. Abraham talks about what used to be the 17-second and 68-second cycle, and now according to Louis, it's down to 14 and 58. But whatever. The point is,
Hmm.
you have your first 17 seconds, and now the thought is going to stimulate another thought. You go a full 68 seconds, and now that thought's actually going to start manifesting into something, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, think about that process. During that first 17 seconds, do you have a strong feeling associated with the thought? Almost never. Almost never. And yet, if you stay with it and you just stay on that focus for that full 68 seconds, feeling starts to slowly creep in a little bit.
Hmm.
And if you
Hmm.
can go on it for more than a minute or so, if you can go on it for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 20
Yeah.
minutes,
Yeah.
the feeling builds and it builds and it builds. I will claim that the feeling was already there. What's building is our perception of it, our sensation of it. We're
Mm-hmm.
experiencing it finally. It's catching
Mm-hmm.
up to the thought. But the
Yeah.
feeling was already there. It's just we didn't
Yeah.
notice it before.
Yeah.
So that's why I think we end up with this dichotomy that says there's thoughts and there are feelings and there the twain shall meet. Well, actually, they are always connected. They're two
Mm-hmm.
aspects of the same phenomenon going on. It's just that we don't experience them at the same time. We don't experience
That's
them
cool.
synchronicity.
Yeah. It goes along with the emotional clearing training I'm doing and that type of facilitation because you take a person into alpha state in order to feel. And so
Hmm.
when they get into that state, and the way they do it is by great relaxation. So it's all based on you really get in touch with your breath. You go really deep inside,
Hmm.
as deep as you can into your body, just like let go. And then you start looking around in your body and you see, well, is any sensations? Is there any constrictions, any pain, anything talking to you? And you say, well, I feel sort of something in the pit of my stomach. So they said, well, let's go there and let's focus on that. So the person focuses on this feeling in the pit of their stomach. Well, what does it feel like? Oh, it just feels like something's pushing out really hard and something else is gripping back, and say, okay, just stay with that feeling. And so we breathe into it, we stay with it. And so many times that will lead to the transformation that the person actually needs, that, the change in their life. And they don't ever even have to put a name to it. Like, oh, I finally, I realize that's my sadness. Or, oh, I realize that's my rage at my mother for blah, blah, blah. You
Hmm.
don't have to even come to that point. The thing is that you were able to feel it in your body. Your body
Right.
had a message for you. It had an organic process it's involved in of letting
Right.
that, letting that feeling be felt. And then sometimes you ask the person, about the associations it brings up in their mind, in their
Hmm.
memory maybe, or an image, and then something comes up, and that image doesn't even have to make sense. Like I had a client the other
Right.
day, and she saw a raven, and this raven head started to change in it, but eventually it showed her all this stuff about herself. She started to realize all these interesting things that came just from that raven, and then a certain feeling of dread that went along with it. And then by following those threads, she was able to come to all this understanding about herself.
Hmm.
And so a lot of times these things they're just happening on all these various levels, and we have to just be receptive. That's why that receptivity is so huge. It's like if we're receptive to what's going on inside of us, moment by moment, then we can follow that thread of, well, what is it telling me? What is it I need to learn from this or receive from this that opens me up more, that helps me know more who I am or more what it is that I need to be doing in order to be going in the direction I want to go.
Hmm.
And so anyway, it's a I just agreeing with you, I guess, that it's a feelings and thoughts are pretty integrated, really,
They really are. Yeah. They're
if
they're
we can
they're
see
all
it from that
connected.
perspective.
And it also reminds me that we often end up with stuff that happens in our lives that have very high levels of feeling sensitivity, often negative sensitivity. Various traumas are a clear example of that, but it can also be minor stuff that happens, just in the course of our regular day. Um, our spouse says something to us, and it's something we've heard 100 times, and we're so sick of it, and it just kind of pushes our button, you know. Well, that thing is something we've given a lot of thought to because it's happened thousands of times. We've been through that thought process so many times that we've built up that feeling. That
Mm-hmm.
first time that we had that thought, there was probably no feeling associated with it at all. But because we stuck with it, we kept looking at it, we kept experiencing it, we kept, the wife kept doing it or the husband kept doing it or whatever. And over time, it just got more and more sensitive. It's like a hot spot, like a sore spot that you just keep pushing the sore spot. And over time, it's like, oh, it's really getting irritating. And now I'm starting to feel feelings about it and so forth. That's the process that I was describing. That's the process of the feeling building over time. And I think that's why both Abraham and Neville and others all emphasize the feeling aspect of what it is you're trying to deliberately create. I mean, obviously, you're
Right.
not going to try and deliberately create something negative, but
Yeah.
when we're trying to deliberately create something positive, they want us to get into that. Neville calls it assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled. They want us
Mm-hmm.
to be into that feeling place. Why? Because it means that we've thought about it enough for the feeling to actually build, to actually
Yeah.
turn into a feeling. And if we stick with it long enough, not only does it turn into a feeling, it becomes a feeling we recognize and we can label it. We can say, "Oh, yeah, that's joy," or "Oh, yeah, that's boredom," or "Oh, yeah, that's frustration. I know that feeling." I've
Mm,
experienced that feeling. I
mm,
recognize it.
mm.
Well, how do I recognize it? Because I kept doing it over and over again. If I don't do it over and over again, I don't feel it. I don't really notice what it is.
Hmm.
And in fact, I like what Cindy Chavez came up with on this one. She pointed out that feeling does not have to be expressed as emotion because we also have our five senses. We can touch, we can feel with
Right,
our
right,
fingers, we can feel
right.
with our body, so to speak.
Yeah.
So even if I can't, if I'm trying to shift my mindset and I'm early in my thought process, so the feeling hasn't really built up very much yet, I can still feel through the physical world. And that form of feeling plays the exact same role as the emotional feeling.
Yeah.
So I can
Right.
build the physical feeling, and over time, the physical feeling turns into the emotional feeling. It turns
Yeah.
into that built up feeling that we associate with whatever the thing is.
Mm. Yeah, and that's so sort of the point I was making too, was that you don't have to have a name on the feeling. It's just
Right.
it is just a feeling. It is
It's
an
just there.
energy. And what
Yeah.
what we work with our clients in emotional clearing is getting them to turn the thing that they had the drama around, or that that
Hmm.
maybe a big charge on,
Hmm.
to start feeling it in their body as energy moving. And if they're
Hmm.
really breathing deeply and they're really in a relaxed state, that can happen pretty readily, where it turns, something that was maybe causing tears 10 minutes before and a great feeling of sadness, it suddenly starts to be experienced as energy moving in, well, where's it moving? Well, it's sort of in my solar plexus and it's in my heart area. So, okay. And what does it feel like? And they feel it, but it doesn't ever have to have the name. This is depression, or this is grief. You don't have to, because sometimes putting the name on it just sends it up into a mental thing even, and it doesn't really help. Sometimes it does help to have a name for the feeling.
Mm.
But I agree with you that the change can take place without it ever having to have a name.
Yeah.
And that's an
Right.
unusual idea for a lot of us.
It
That all,
is.
all you got to do is feel it, right? But that is true, that's what the whole law of attraction works on, vibration. And so if it's not felt, you in this 3D realm, it doesn't always seem like you can just think it into existence. It seems like you have to think and feel it into existence.
And one actually goes with the other.
Right.
That's what my point is. You don't have to worry about the fact that you don't feel it yet.
Okay.
Just stay with it
Yeah.
and just make it as real as you can in your mind and just because here's what we usually do. What we usually do is we think, okay, I want to think beautiful weather into existence, okay? Or I want to think girlfriend into existence, or I want to think wealth into existence, or
Right.
whatever. So we think, well, okay, so what does my ideal girlfriend look like? So I describe what
Yeah.
my ideal girlfriend looks like or what kind of person she is or whatever. And then I'm done. Right? That's the way
No.
we treat it. I'm done. I've
Yeah,
done it,
right,
right?
right, right, right. Yeah. But did
Well,
you get
no, you're
into
not
the
really done.
feeling?
You haven't got the feeling going yet. You just
That's
got the
right.
thought part going. You
That's
you
right.
create a little map. There's your little map. Okay, good. Now what are you going to do with your map? Well, you got to keep on it. You got to
Yeah.
keep working with it and build the feeling up over time, not because you're building it up physically, but because you're continuing to focus on it. The
Yeah.
feeling builds with it over time.
Yeah.
So you have to
Right.
stick with it. You have to stick with it until
You're
the feeling gets in there. And once the feeling gets in there, that's your clue you've stuck with it long enough. Now you know you've actually attracted it because you're
mhm.
feeling it. So it isn't that you have to make the feeling, it's just you have to stick with it until the feeling shows up.
Mhm. Yeah, I've tried that. I mean, I've done visualization where I lay on the couch and picture the same exact key going into the same exact lock on my new cabin in the mountains, and it's like, and watching myself turn it and the door open, and then I repeat that scene every day, for weeks. Um, and I did it in order to allow the feeling to grow, of the real feeling that okay, I do have this cabin, and that is my key, and that is my lock and my front door, and that is what it looked like when I first opened the door. So I did it for quite a while, but then I just stopped doing it eventually because I couldn't see that it was going anywhere. you know, but
And that's just it. That's exactly why we stop with anything like this that we
yeah,
try to do deliberately. It's almost like we give up too soon. And I think we give up too soon because we've concluded that it's not happening, so it's just not going to happen. It's just
Mm-hmm.
not, it's not in the cards, and so we
Mm-hmm.
give up on it.
Mm-hmm.
When in fact, if all we were to do is just to sit there and say, not sit there, but go through the processes we're going through and just keep working on putting that lock into that key into that lock, and just doing it over and over again until the feeling builds up, until that feeling becomes a passion. We just gave up too soon is all. We just gave up too
Mm-hmm.
soon. All we have to do is just
Mm-hmm.
keep going with it. Keep doing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We're actually down to about less than 2 minutes left. I want to make sure I get our messages in before we go.
Great.
So if you're not yet a subscriber, what are you waiting for? Become a subscriber. The instructions on how to do it are in most of the places where this podcast is posted. But if you can't find in the description where the links are to subscribe, just go to the homepage of the website, loatoday.net. You'll find them right there. And then once you become a subscriber, share the fact that you've been subscribing. And Tom, I'm telling you, we're getting some nice emails and text messages and messenger messages, Facebook, all kinds of stuff from people saying that they're sharing the message. In fact, there was one person, a follower named Nasha, who was sharing the video on that we post normally, when live streaming works, that we post to the Law of
Mm-hmm.
Attraction Change My Life group. And she was even getting frustrated because she didn't realize that you had to be a member of the group in order to see the video, even though she posted it on her timeline. But we got that one straightened out. But here she is, she's actually trying to post it on her timeline, and we gave her some clues on how to make all that work. But I mean, how
Mm-hmm.
cool. People are actually sharing, and it is making a
Yeah,
difference. So
that's
thank you to
cool.
everybody who's doing that. And for somebody who wants to reach out to a life coach, because sometimes we need that, you're a life coach. How does somebody
Mm-hmm.
reach you for a private session?
They can go to my website, which is youarejoy. That's the three words, youarejoy.com. And there's a free half-hour session you can sign up for on my site. So I welcome you to come on and give me a what am I going to say? Give me a call. Give me a
Talk to
call.
me.
Check me out on the web, and if you want to.
Yeah, we love having phone calls. So this has been good. I hope you have a really happy weekend, Tom, and I guess we'll talk to you in a week from now.
All right. Look forward to that, Walt.
All right, and I would do
All
too. We
right.
hope that you'll join us next time as well here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Come on, Walt, dance.
Yeah, stick with it.
Most exercises I get all day.